Well, hello there. There are so many times when we have seen a gorgeous scene somewhere and wanted to paint it, but didn't want to take too long and still get down the most important impression that we had. What if I told you that that is possible? In this video, I'm going to break it down and show you how you can accomplish this in just 1 hour if you concentrate on a few key important things. So stay with me and let's find out. These are the colors we are going to use. From left to right, we have Naples yellow. This is cadmium yellow light, Indian yellow deep, permanent red medium from Rembrandt, and I left a little bit of room in here because we're going to be making an orange, mixing cadmium yellow light with this permanent red medium. All right, so in the palette it will be right here. Winston red, which is not absolutely necessary, but I like it because it's a very transparent, nice and dark, rich red that can make an earthy green in a hurry. And then rose quinacridone, but if you don't have rose quinacridone, you can use permanent rose or even permanent magenta or Liston crimson. Right here I left another bit of room because we will be making a nice purple using the rose quinacridone mixed with a little bit of the cobalt blue. If you don't have cobalt blue, again, you can use ultramarine blue. I just like cobalt blue because it's a little bit lighter and richer. And this is a color that I don't use very often, but it can be really nice on a landscape painting, and it's called transparent green. All right, any brown will do it. It's a very earthy golden green. Sometimes it's called gold green, and you can mix ivory black and yellow to get a very similar result. And viridian. Right here we have titanium white and ivory black. All right, the first thing that I did was tint this canvas with permanent red right here. I first did it with a Bristol brush, and then I sprayed around with a nice soft fan brush, and I use mineral spirits to thin out the paint. All right, and then after I sprayed it all really nice, I pat it dry a little bit with a paper towel. We're gonna be leaving this to dry, and I want it to be a nice warm red to make the painting glow from the beginning, since there is a lot of green in that painting. I have the palette set up already. So this is titanium white with a little touch of cadmium yellow light. This is Naples yellow light. This is Indian yellow, and this is cadmium yellow light and a tiny bit of permanent red to make cadmium yellow deep. And this orange is made with a lot of cadmium yellow light and permanent red. This is a yellow ochre that I made, and I made it with a lot of yellow plus a little bit of cobalt blue and a little bit of this tone that is burnt sienna. And the burnt sienna I made by mixing Winston red with cobalt blue and a lot of Indian yellow. I wanted to be very transparent, so it's important that those colors that I used were all transparent. So this yellow ochre that I made was by mixing this with a lot of this yellow. Okay, this is Winston red, quinacridone rose, and this magenta is made by adding quinacridone rose and a little bit of cobalt blue. This is cobalt blue, and this is a greenish blue, or you can call it phthalo blue, and I made it by adding cobalt blue and viridian, and I mix it together. And this is a gold green. all right? And this gold green is gonna be very important for this landscape, but you can also make it if you don't have it. Now this is an olive green, a beautiful olive green that is very, very similar to this one. So if you don't have this gold green, you can just use this one. And this olive green was made by adding black and cadmium yellow light together. Now this is a gray that I make by adding white and ivory black. So I didn't want to use any of the earth tones that are already in the tube. I wanted to make my own. And I wanted to make as many of the colors as possible with the colors I already have to have more cohesion in the painting. So let's get started. The first thing I do is coat the entire canvas with linseed oil. And I do it so the paint will be gliding nicely around and it will have an effect of wet into wet. I wipe everything very carefully and really good with a paper towel, and I do it twice, one in a vertical position, another in a horizontal position, or vice versa. The main thing is you want the oil to penetrate the canvas really, really well, but you do not want it to be runny at all. So you want to wipe up as much as you can, because if you don't, then the paint will glide right off the canvas, plus it will take forever to dry. Then I proceed with the overall placement using the earth tone that I made, equivalent to the burnt sienna, and I'm using a small brush. I don't want to be exactly accurate, I just want to place it on the ballpark, because remember, I'm giving myself an hour to do this whole thing. So if I'm taking half an hour just to get the composition right, then I only have half an hour left for the rest of the colors. So I am doing this as fast as possible. What first caught my attention was the contrast between the delicate dandelion heads and the dramatic sunset sky. The warm glow near the horizon and the cooler blues above the mountains create a beautiful atmosphere that I couldn't resist painting. And since I have just 1 hour to complete this painting, I'll be focusing on the essentials, which are composition, values, and color harmony. I'm keeping the drawing simple to establish the horizon line, which is where the mountains and the trees in the distance are, and place the main masses, which are the dandelions. At this stage, accuracy matters more than detail. I took this photo at a nearby field about 2 kilometers from my house. I was very lucky because this is private property, but there was a spot where the fence was missing. So I snuck in to take many photos. In the distance, I could see the owners looking at me, but they let me be since it was obvious that I didn't have any sinister intentions. I will definitely be coming back here. This is so beautiful. I'm making the overall tone of the mountains in the distance. Now I know that it looks really purple in the photo, but when I look at the photo in the computer, it's definitely not that purple. And when I was there, it didn't appear to be that purple either, because the sun, the light of the sky, the sun permeated everything around it. So the mountains were substantially warmer and more yellow, but also I know that because they're in the distance, they will have substantially less chroma. So the best way that I know how to do that is by mixing the colors into the black and white, and there you have it. That's why I have the black and white mixture, so I can mix the colors into it and push the mountain far away. Now you see how I have to keep adding the yellow into the mixture, and it's never quite, it doesn't appear to be quite as warm as I need it to be. I do it in very, very small sections, because if I put too much yellow right away and I mix it too much into it, then the whole thing would change. But it's a matter of trial, and error. You put it in there. If you don't like it, then you put it again. You make it again, and you keep adding to it until you like what you see. But I really always try to get it as close as possible as I can from the beginning, because one thing will lead to another one and another to another one. So if I say, all right, this is good enough, I don't want to work in the mountains anymore, and I work on the trees right below it, well, I have to look at the mountains to judge the trees, and if the colors of the mountains are not correct at that stage, then the colors of the trees will also not be correct. See where I'm going with this? So it is better that you take your time to establish more than the shape. The shape doesn't matter all that much, because nobody really knows how those trees look like or the shape of the mountain. So you have a lot of leeway and freedom into how accurate you're going to be on those shapes. However, the values are very important on any painting, even more important than the colors. And if you get those values wrong, if you make that mountain too dark, then everything else will be wrong also. So now I am blocking in the sky. The sunset is the heart of this painting. So I start with the largest shapes and gradually blend the warm and the cool colors. One of the advantages of working from a photo is that the light remains consistent, and this allows me to study the subtle color transitions without the scene changing every 2 minutes. Once the sky is established, I move to the distant landscape, simplifying the hills into broad shapes and muted tones, and keeping the background understated, and this will help the dandelions stand out later. Next, I move into dandelions, and what I always like to do is coat it with a good dose of Indian yellow, and this has a tiny bit of burnt sienna mixed into the Indian yellow and the red, and I do it because I want them to glow. And if I start with the black right away and then add pigment to that, they will get really, really chalky, and they will lose their warmth. So I find out that it's much better if I start with the warmth tone, very transparent first, and then I added a little bit of the white mixture of the sky, the one from the sun, and I do it in very broad strokes and very loosely. I don't want to be too precious because I don't want to put any detail at this stage. I add a little bit of the mountain mixture plus the olive green that I mix from the palette, and then I start blocking in the distant poppies and the greenery right behind the dandelions. I absolutely love dandelions, and I painted many paintings with them, especially at the golden hour, the hour before the sun goes down and the day meets the night, because I feel it's the moment when dandelions become stars and the evening sky begins to dream. I'm laying down the poppies now, and I absolutely adore poppies, and I have made many paintings with poppies in it too, and I will paint them eventually again in the future. But in this painting I have to be very careful because they are not the protagonist, so they have to be very, very understated and just painted as masses of a little bit of the red color. I'm putting the trees in the distance, and they're a little darker, but I have to make sure that the color is not too saturated, because otherwise they will command attention. And those trees are pretty far away. They're a little closer than the mountains, but they're still pretty far, so they're just masses of a little dark and light from the sky. It's important that you don't get too precious in painting them, because then your eye will focus on them instead of focusing on the foreground. Rather than painting every flower individually, because I couldn't do that, I'm suggesting groups of dandelions with carefully placed highlights. The goal is to create the impression of a field filled with flowers and poppies while maintaining a loose painterly approach. As the painting develops, I will be adjusting the values and strengthen the focal area. I'm looking for a balance between realism and atmosphere. Sometimes what matters most isn't painting every detail, but capturing the feeling of standing there on a warm Malaga evening. It's very difficult for me to paint very loose in this matter and to not pay attention to details, because my natural tendency is to look really far and to try to capture everything as accurately as possible. But the goal of this painting is to make it seem like I was painting it there, like I was on site. And I have to be very fast because the light changes really quickly. So when you're painting in the studio, you have an unlimited amount of time, and you can spend literally weeks or months on a painting if you so desire. But if you're trying to capture a landscape on site, that's not possible. So it forces you to be very quick and very precise and selective about what you want to capture and what you want to leave out. And very often is what you leave out is even more important than what you put in. Now, if I have painted this in the studio thinking it's a painting for the studio and I'm gonna take my time, and a larger painting, I would put a lot more detail definitely on the dandelions and the flowers at the front. But this is not the goal of this demonstration. This demonstration was for 1 hour, and to show you what it can be done in 1 hour, and when is it okay for you to say, I am done and this painting is good enough and I have achieved when I wanted to achieve, and then move on to the next painting. I've been talking for way too long right now, so I'm gonna take a little break and leave you with this lovely music. See you in a little bit. All right, and we are back. What I'm doing now is lifting some of the color of the canvas. Now remember that beautiful permanent red that we washed the canvas with? That's what I'm trying to reveal now. Now that is a reddish orange pinkish, and it's a beautiful complementary of blue because orange is the complementary of blue. So if you lift that color of the canvas, it's gonna make the blue of the sky shine. So that was the main goal when I decided on that color, and it works really good for landscapes for that reason, because on landscapes there's a lot of greenery, and what is the complementary of green? Red. And there's also a lot of blue because of the sky, and what is the complementary of blue? Orange. So voila, there you have it. I let this stage dry out completely before returning to the next phase. I get the palette back from the freezer. I like to put the palette in the freezer by the end of a painting session because it keeps the colors fresh and wet for as long as I want them to be, and therefore there's no waste. And I am making the overall mixtures for the next part of the painting. This can be tedious, and you may want to just jump in and start making the colors one by one and lay them in the canvas, but I really recommend that you take your time to make the overall mixtures, because that will save you a lot of time later on. Once you have the train of thought and you know what you need to be doing on your painting, you don't want to have to stop to make another color and so forth. I used to paint like that for years until I realized it's better to be a little bit more disciplined and make your colors first. Even though they may not be exactly the colors you need and you may have to adjust them, but it will be a lot faster because you'll be working with those colors instead of keep grabbing them from the individual colors from the tube that you have on the edges of the palette. So I started making the greens, and I'm making them from the darkest to the lightest, and as you can see I am adding yellow to make them lighter. And this is very important, you do not want to add white unless you want to cool it, because if you add white then the green turns into a completely different hue. Now I'm adding the white because I want it cool, see? So there's you want to have a different, you want to have two different versions of the green. You want to have a warm green and a cool green. And the white is the best way to cool the green. But don't ever think of white when you want to lighten a color, because if you add white to lighten a color, you're cooling it and you're not lightening it. You're just getting a completely different version of the color that you want. If you want the same color but lighter, you need to add the color adjacent to it that is lighter. Usually is the yellow. So if you want to lighten a red, you may want to add yellow to it, because if you add white, then guess what? Then red turns into pink. So think about that. If you want to cool it, then you add the white, because white basically cools every color. But if you just want to lighten up without altering the temperature, you definitely want to add yellow. So now I am making the reds, and you can see that they are, now I'm making the other version of the green. And notice that I laid them down side by side. One is substantially darker and more muted. The one on the right that I just finished is substantially darker and more muted than the one that I'm working on right now. And I'm adding a little bit of the purple that I made to tone down the green, because if this purple is the complementary of green, if I don't add it to it, then the green would be too unrealistic and too garish. And there's absolutely no color in nature, with few exceptions, where they're completely bright and on their own. They're usually toned down somewhat, but they're complementary colors or the colors adjacent to it. And in this case, since there's a lot of green, naturally there will be a lot of red in the greens. But notice that I am grabbing the purple reds instead of the warmer reds, because the warmer reds are too potent and they will make the green mixture too muddy in a hurry. So be very careful. If you want to tone down the green slightly without making it muddy, you may want to go to the delicate purple reds, which is either Windsor red, transparent oxide red, dioxanate purple, or alizarin crimson. Alizarin crimson is a very good color, or quinacridone rose. I'm not having in this palette alizarin crimson, but definitely you could have used alizarin crimson in place of the quinacridone rose. So now I'm making the mixtures of the poppies, and I'm starting with the Windsor red. I'm adding the yellow to warm them up, but I also add a little bit of white to cool it. And now I'm making the green down version to push some of the poppies back. And I noticed that I grabbed the mixture from the side, because that way the palette will be harmonious, since remember, all the colors affect all the colors around them. And to achieve harmony, you want to keep grabbing from the mixtures that you've already made as much as possible. There are many ways to achieve color harmony in a painting. So color harmony is really making all the colors feel like they belong together. And you can achieve that by, for example, starting with a very limited palette, like ultramarine blue, burnt sienna, cadmium yellow, titanium white. That's one of them. The less colors you can get away with, the better. Now this is a full palette, but you can do very similar to this with a much more reduced choice. Let's see, how else you could achieve harmony in a painting? Well, mixing the colors into each other. This is why I'm making my own mixtures, because that way I can make the different mixtures with the mixtures I already have. Instead of using colors straight from the tube, you're letting every mixture contain a tiny amount of one or two other colors from the painting. This creates a visual relationship between all the colors. How else could you achieve color harmony? Well, definitely using a dominant color temperature. In this painting, the dominant color temperature is warm. Definitely. There are a lot of poppies in the background and the sun is shining through the mountains. There's a lot of greenery. So this is a primarily warm painting. So you're gonna decide, is the painting warm? And if the painting is warm, then it will be mostly reds, orange, and yellows. Or is the painting cool? If the painting is cool, then the blues, the greens, and the violets will dominate. In this case, the blues and the greens and the violets are substantially toned down to make the warms dominate. So you will be using in this painting the opposite to create an accent, a contrast. So since this painting is primarily warm, then the contrast will be the blue. So the little bit of the blue from the sky and the purple from the mountain definitely adds as a beautiful contrast against the reds of the poppies, the greenery in the warm green in the foreground, and definitely the yellows in the dandelions. How else can you create color harmony? You can create a color scheme. You can choose some of these classic harmonies like complementary blue-orange or red-green. Now this is very interesting because in this painting there is a lot of red from the poppies and green from the greenery, but there's also the blue from the sky and the orange from the dandelions. So in this painting I'll say it's more like a blue-orange rather than a red-green, but it could be either way. Now the color scheme could also be created with analogous colors. The colors next to each other on the color wheel will be definitely harmonious, and it could also be creating a color scheme through a triad. If you skip 3 evenly spaced colors in the color wheel, then the colors will be harmonious as well. How else can you create harmony in the painting? You could tone down intense colors, because this is what I was just telling you a minute ago, that pure saturated colors everywhere can look chaotic. Reserve your brightest and purest colors for the focal point and soften the rest with neutrals. How else can you create harmony in your painting? You can use a color ground, and that's exactly what we did in this painting. We used a reddish tone underneath. The tiny bits that show through the painting, like the reds that are coming through this canvas, can unify the entire painting, because the red, remember, is the complementary of green, and there is a lot of green in the painting. How else can you check for harmony in your painting? Well, you will be checking for values. That's the most important thing, and you saw me using the red filter for that previously, because a painting with strong value relationships often feels harmonious even if the colors are unusual. If you don't have the red filter, you can also squint as often as you can to judge the light and the dark pattern. That's part of the reason why I like to use a hat, a strong visor, when I paint, because it helps me squint and focus my vision as I'm painting. How else could you create color harmony? By repeating colors around the painting. This is a very efficient way of doing it. If you use a bright yellow flower, echo a touch of that yellow elsewhere. In the grass, in the shadows, in the sky, in the reflections. Repetition creates unity. And one thing that I found very useful, and I used to do it for many years too, is to choose a mother color. I will call my mother mixture. And then I will add a tiny amount of it to nearly every mixture. And this can make a sunset scene or dandelion painting feel very beautifully unified. That's another way of doing it. The choice is yours, and you could also pick many of this throughout your painting, or just a handful. It depends on what your choice is or what you're trying to achieve. It's time for another break and more lovely music. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a like and subscribe. Your subscription and like will help me tremendously in making sure I keep delivering content like this. Till the next time.